Hi, my name is Sirvani Kuraganti, and I will be talking about the 2011 Tohoku earthquake in Japan. On March 11th, 2011, a magnitude 9.0 level earthquake hit 231 miles northeast of Tokyo. This earthquake lasted approximately 3 minutes, and 1 hour after the earthquake, a huge tsunami with more than 40 meters high of waves hit this area. The destructive aftermath of this incident made irreparable damage not only in Japan, but also it was felt across the world. Some prefectures that also felt smaller earthquakes were Nagano, Niigata, and Honshu. This earthquake's intense magnitude created more than 100 major aftershocks. The shock from the earthquake, like I've mentioned before, created tsunami waves as high as 40 meters that rushed onto the land and wiped out trucks, buildings, and factories. There were about 15,891 confirmed deaths, mostly due to drowning, and over 2,500 people that were still reported missing. There were damages of approximately $300 million that the Japanese government had to face, and about 185,000 people were evacuated from the flooded areas. Not only was the water a huge problem, but the aftermath of the tsunami created a nuclear emergency in the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant because it lost electricity for its cooling system and could have released potential radioactive materials, and this caused more evacuations in the area. Some of the other casualties was that there was no water or electricity in many of the homes. Airport subways were closed off. Roads were blocked. There was almost like citywide blackouts. The release of radioactive material from this nuclear emergency and a lot of fires also, as you can see in the pictures, resulted kind of as a case of the tsunami, the earthquake. And 4 years after the earthquake, more than 200,000 people who lost their homes are still living in temporary housing. So, what actually caused this earthquake? So, the Tohoku earthquake struck offshore of Japan along a subduction zone, as you can see in the picture where it's located. And in the subduction zone, one plate slides under another plate. So this is where two of the Earth's tectonic plates kind of collide. One plate slides beneath another in the mantle, which is the hottest layer under the crust. And when these plates, which are rough and they stick together, and when they kind of collide against each other, they build up energy that is eventually released as earthquakes. And in this specific case, researchers found that there was a thin, slippery clay layer between the two plates that was lining the fault, and this kind of allowed a smoother, like more deep slide between the two plates, and it slid 50 meters, which was almost unprecedented, and that's why there were such devastating causes. So here are some statistics that were detailed in the Zara et al. Study. The first one, as you can see, is the building damage distribution. One dot represents 180 buildings lost. And in the red circle dot, we look at Fukushima, which is where the nuclear power plant was. So you can kind of see it in relation to the rest of Japan. And the different dots the darker the dot is, the greater the destruction of the buildings are. So completely lining the coast, we see that thousands and thousands of buildings were lost in the damages of the earthquake tsunami. And then in kind of the second figure, it shows the percentage of damage caused by the earthquake versus the tsunami as of March 10th, 2012. So as you see, the red color is the greater damage caused by the earthquake. So you can kind of see that the tsunami damages were kind of more concentrated near the coast. And then as you travel inland, most of the damage was caused by the earthquake. And there's so much damage that kind of traveled completely throughout Japan. And then finally, in the last figure, we see the division of the total approximately 19,000 deaths and missed peoples based on the reason as of March 10th, 2012. And you can see that 4% of the people that were missing and have passed away was due to drowning by the tsunami. And the rest of the 5% is kind of split up between shaking from the collapse of the buildings, either fire, landslides, and other things, or indirect causes. This EPI study, called the Health and Life Revival Council in Ishinomaki District, kind of looked at Ishinomaki, which is one of the municipalities that was most severely damaged from the earthquake and subsequent tsunamis. About 8,000 families remained at home, even though there was severe structural damage. And these kind of populations are called stay-at-home victims, and they're in general provided with less support by government agencies than those who are living in temporary shelters. So kind of the purpose of this study is to identify and evaluate stay-at-home survivors for providing more rapid and appropriate support in response to their needs. And this was done by the Health and Life Revival Council in the Ishinomaki District, the RCI, and they did this kind of by conducting a face-to-face survey. So the methods that they used was that they created a semi-structured questionnaire which composed of 3 sections. The first is household demographics, second is social background, the third is health condition of individuals most in need of medical support. And they kind of analyzed about 4,000 households out of the 8,000 that remained. And these 4,000 households agreed to be interviewed in written forms during the first term and future surveys. The first term survey was started approximately 6 to 12 months after the earthquake and tsunami. So before the surveys, they kind of realized that factors that were associated with sleep difficulties frequently begin as stress-related phenomena, including natural disasters. And these factors included loss of pleasure in life, living in a pension, or a public livelihood assistance. So kind of the findings from these different surveys was that they noticed that interacting with neighbors by visiting one another and participants who had emotional and social support were positively associated with sleep. On the flip side, people who kind of faced a loss of pleasure in life and changes in familial structure or changes in work status were associated with psychological distress and then in turn lack of sleep. So to kind of conclude, the study showed how strengthening social ties before and after disasters can be extremely important in building a resilient community capable of supporting the physical and mental health of its citizens. After the tsunami, the Japanese Meteorological Agency was reprimanded because of their inaccurate initial warnings. They had underestimated the size of the wave and the strength, causing the country to be a little bit underprepared. Additionally, the coastal areas had less than an hour to prepare for the first attack of the tsunami, which was not enough time. Because a majority of the area consisted of flat farmland, it became increasingly difficult also for people to reach higher grounds for safety. Even through these issues, the government of Japan was very impressive in their immediate effects to alleviate the situation. All the ministries and departments were involved in the response, and they worked very well together and began their operations immediately on the day of the attack. The Japanese Red Crescent Society, which I would say is similar to the Red Cross, deployed teams immediately and worked hard to find temporary housing for refugees the day of the attack. Additionally, the Ministry of Health began preparing suitable vehicles for supplying water and assigning hospitals for remedies of the casualties. In addition to the medical teams, many therapists and social workers were also sent to the temporary housings and began shifting treatment to psychotherapy about a week or so after the attack. Construction of temporary housing began 8 days after the event. Overall, I believe that the government of Japan worked really well together in order to immediately manage the situation, and there was good communication between the different departments of the government. Thanks to Japan's early earthquake detection systems, Tokyo residents were given last-minute warnings before the earthquake and were able to quickly seek safety. The city government also stopped high-speed trains and factory assembly lines in order to avoid damages. A state of nuclear emergency was declared during the day of the event. Japan pioneered disaster management mostly due to its tumultuous past with frequent earthquakes, yet the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami managed to be one of the most destructive. I believe that this is because of the unprecedented scale of the quake itself, and this caused immense damage along with the aftermath of the tsunami and nuclear power plant failures. Japan's planning laws, especially in construction, held up many of the buildings from the earthquake. However, I believe that if the earthquake was the sole disaster, that Japan would have been very well prepared. However, they were not also ready for the large-scale tsunami. Um, Another thing that was noticed was that there was a very strong commitment from different NGOs, and many people were willing to volunteer and help for the cause and kind of help Japan restore itself as soon as possible. Additionally, they learned a lot from this devastating attack, and moving forward, they've created an improved tsunami early detection system along with the existing early detection earthquake system.